There is a sound that exists in the heart of the jungle, a profound, deafening silence that follows a storm. On November 18, 1978, this silence fell over a small clearing in the remote wilderness of Guyana. But it was not the silence of nature. It was the silence of the dead. Over 900 bodies, men, women, and most tragically, over 300 children lay scattered around a central pavilion. They were not the victims of a natural disaster or a war. They were the followers of a man who had promised them paradise and delivered them to hell. This is the story of Jonestown. It is not just the story of a cult. It is a chilling examination of the human desire to believe, the terrifying power of a single charismatic voice, and the fine line between faith and fear. How does it dream of utopia, built on the foundations of love and equality, rot from the inside out and end in a vat of cyanide-laced poison? To understand the end, we must first understand the beginning, and the man at the center of it all, James Warren Jones. Born in rural Indiana, Jim Jones was a strange and charismatic child, obsessed with religion and death. He would hold elaborate funerals for small animals, but he also possessed a powerful, almost supernatural charisma. When he spoke, people listened. In the 1950s, he founded his own church in Indianapolis, the People's Temple. From its inception, the temple was different. In a deeply segregated America, Jones preached a gospel of racial equality. His church was a rainbow family, a haven for the disenfranchised. He welcomed African Americans, treating them as equals in a way they had never experienced in other churches. The temple was more than a church. It was a community. They provided food for the hungry, homes for the homeless, and a profound sense of belonging for those who felt lost. For hundreds of people, Jim Jones was not just a preacher. He was a savior. He was Dad. In the mid-1960s, Jones moved his flock to California, seeking a more progressive environment. It was here that the temple's power and influence exploded. They became a significant political force, their members a disciplined and dedicated voting bloc courted by prominent politicians. But as Jones's power grew, so did his paranoia and his need for absolute control. The loving Dad began to show a darker side. He demanded absolute loyalty. Members were forced to surrender their life savings, their homes, and their possessions to the church. Families were systematically broken apart, with children taught to see Jones as their true father and to report on their own parents for any sign of disloyalty. Communication with the outside world was severed. The dream of a community was slowly becoming a prison of the mind. Jones began to perform elaborate miracle healings, faking cancer cures to solidify his followers' belief that he was a living God. He used a combination of love bombing, public humiliation, sleep deprivation, and relentless indoctrination to break down the will of his followers, making them completely dependent on him for their sense of self-worth and their very reality. By the mid-1970s, as media scrutiny and reports from defectors began to grow, Jones declared that the corrupt, racist America was no longer safe for his rainbow family. He announced a plan for a mass exodus, a final escape to a promised land, a socialist, agricultural utopia he would build in the jungles of Guyana. He called it Jonestown. For his exhausted and increasingly isolated followers, it was the ultimate promise, a paradise on earth, a sanctuary from their enemies. Hundreds of people sold everything they had left and followed their Messiah into the jungle. But the paradise they found was a concentration camp. Life in Jonestown was a cycle of grueling, back-breaking labor under a sweltering sun with meager rations of rice and beans, while Jones lived in his own cabin with a stocked refrigerator. His voice was broadcast over loudspeakers 24 hours a day, a relentless stream of sermons, news twisted to fit his paranoid worldview, and threats against those who dared to question him. Escape was impossible. The settlement was surrounded by dense, impenetrable jungle and armed guards. The final descent into madness began with the White Nights. These were loyalty tests, mass gatherings in the central pavilion where Jones would announce that their enemies were closing in, and the only way out was revolutionary suicide. Guards would bring forward vats of what he claimed was poison. He would order his followers, including the children, to line up and drink. They would scream, they would cry, they would obey. After they had all drunk from the cups, Jones would reveal that it was only a drill, a test of their faith. He was conditioning them for the end. He was making the unthinkable routine. In November 1978, that end was set in motion by an outside force. California Congressman Leo Ryan, responding to desperate pleas from concerned relatives of temple members, announced he would lead a fact-finding mission to Jonestown. For those trapped inside, Ryan's visit was a terrifying risk, but also a final, desperate glimmer of hope. When Ryan and his delegation arrived, they were treated to a carefully staged performance of joy and contentment. But during the festivities, secret notes were passed. "Please help us get out of Jonestown." The next day, as Ryan prepared to leave, a handful of brave members declared they wanted to go with him. Jones's mask of control shattered. As the defectors and Ryan's team made their way to a remote airstrip, they were ambushed by Jonestown's guards. Congressman Ryan was shot and killed on the tarmac, along with 4 others. The bridge to the outside world had been burned. Back at the pavilion, Jones knew it was over. He gathered his flock for one final white night. This time it was not a drill. On an audio recording captured by the FBI, we can hear the final horrifying moments. Jones's voice, calm at first, then rising to a fanatical roar, tells his followers that the time has come to die with dignity, to commit revolutionary suicide before their enemies arrive to torture their children. He tells them the poison will only bring a peaceful sleep. But the recording tells a different story. The sound of children screaming, the cries of parents as they are forced to administer the cyanide-laced, grape-flavored drink to their own babies using syringes. It was not a mass suicide. It was a mass murder, orchestrated by a tyrant who could not bear to lose control. A nurse who survived described the scene. They started with the babies. Within hours, a silence fell over the jungle. The dream of the People's Temple was dead, drowned in a sea of poison. Jonestown is a timeless warning that the road to hell is often paved with the promise of paradise, and that the most dangerous monsters are the ones who claim to be saviors.